Meredith, it's great to speak with you. How does it feel having a film at one of the biggest film festivals in the world, the Toronto International Film Festival, especially this kind of film that we're going to talk about?
It's amazing. In short, I just feel so fortunate, so excited. And yeah, I feel like TIFF will be a perfect place to share this film with Canadian audiences.
Definitely. What a film that's got layer after layer, story after story. Let's get right into the meat and potatoes. What is this film called and what is it about?
Yes, so this film is called Seagrass, and it is a dark, intense family drama that follows a Japanese Canadian woman who has recently lost her mother. And this this loss has somehow created a rift in her marriage to her husband. So she brings her family, her husband and her two daughters, to a self-development retreat on a small island. And as you can imagine, tensions escalate there, and we see how the family copes in this situation.
Before I get to the parents, I want to get to the children. First off, where did you guys find these two young ladies? Because they were amazing. They were natural. I don't even know if they're actually sisters, but the way they
Yeah.
acted reminded me of how kids act. I couldn't tell if they
Yeah.
were acting or was this like, are we doing some kind of
Was it a
reality show or
documentary?
something? Yeah.
No, they were acting. They're just incredible. So they were found by our Canadian casting directors, Chris Waz and Kara Ide. And I mean, Chris and Kara literally, I think they wrote to every single children's acting school in the country looking for these kids. And it was so hard to find them that we didn't actually lock our cast until just over a week before shooting. So I was so nervous leading up to this. We'd found Remy a little bit earlier, but we were trying to find the sister as well. And then just at the very end, Naya came in, and I she was the last person to come in for that role. And I just knew, okay, we have we have our sisters now. It's all gonna work out. And yeah, I don't know how they pulled out such incredible performances. They're just naturally talented. They're just amazing.
Just the stories about the children alone, and I'm going to separate them from the parents.
Yeah.
They have their own story because they've dealt with something that we all have dealt with in some way, shape, or form, trying to fit in.
Mhm.
And as somebody who is not Caucasian, dealing with racism.
Yeah, exactly. I think that when I was writing the story, I really saw it as being primarily about the three female characters in the family. So both of the daughters and the mother, and they're all having these unique storylines, and they're all having different storylines and different they're all asking these big questions in their lives, but it's coming up in very different ways. And yeah, I think as mixed race kids, they were experiencing a lot of what I experienced as a kid being biracial as well. And so I wanted to bring a little bit of that into the story also.
Definitely did that. But there's also a great dynamic between the two of them because they really do act like sisters.
Yeah.
They fight, but they will protect themselves, protect each other to the end.
Yes, exactly. And I think that is something that I was really interested in exploring with a sibling relationship. It can be, I think, one of the hardest relationships and one of the most beautiful. And you're just so close to your siblings. Not everyone is, but I know often you have such a complex relationship with your siblings. So I really wanted to look at that dynamic in all of its complexity. And the two actors were so great together that even when the camera wasn't rolling, they felt like sisters to me.
I believe it. Absolutely
Yeah.
believe it. Okay, now I want to get to the dad.
Yeah.
And again, I do not want to give too much away, but I
Yeah.
felt that the dad was, I mean, good heart, but can I say clueless on certain levels of his relationship and in life around him?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a great way to put it. I think that, yeah, like you said, I think that he is trying in his own ways and falling short. And a lot of the story is about that realization, if anything. It's not so much just about what happens, it's about coming to terms with maybe his faults.
It's funny. He reminded me of as if in his head, he wanted to have the Brady Bunch family, or that unique perfect family that we would see on television. And it was hard for him to realize and see that was absolutely not the case.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I think that often what I was kind of interested in with him in particular is this projection of what he wants, or what he wants in his wife, but not actually seeing who she actually is and what she actually needs, is something that I was really interested in exploring. So it's interesting you say that, for sure.
Going before we go to the mother, because you talked about projecting, that's
Mhm.
kind of like what we see with the other couples, because it's
Yeah,
almost as if, even though everybody who is there is having a problem,
yeah.
it was almost like, what's the old saying? The grass is always greener on the other side. Can I use that?
Yes, yeah. And I think that, yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of projection going on, and I wanted to portray the other couple, Pat and Carol, played by Chris Pang and Sarah Gadon, as sort of this, it's like this idealized couple. And so throughout the film, we don't even necessarily truly know who they are, because we're seeing them so often for most of the film through the eyes of the main characters.
You know what? I would love to see, if you ever did a part two, it would be about those two,
Yeah.
and then
What kind
follow
of stuff is
along.
going on there?
Exactly, to really
Yeah.
see, yeah, what's going on behind closed doors. But
Yeah.
now let's get to the mom, who really is the main
Mhm.
character. And can you talk about that again, and where the inspiration for her came from? Because she is a very complex person, because she does want the perfect life, but trying to explain that it's kind of hard to live that in this society at that time is not easy.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And Judith was played by Ali Mackey, who did an incredible job. And um, yeah, she brought all of those layers to it. And when I was writing the character of Judith, what I really wanted to look at is someone who's feeling very fractured in a lot of ways, and just the questions that come up around that. So I think she's feeling a lot of questions around her identity as a woman and a mother, and kind of what that role means. And she's also looking at her identity as a Japanese Canadian person. And especially because, early on in the film, we find out that her mother has recently passed away. I think that that leads her to a lot of questions around, what she cannot have, and that's part of her grieving process. But she's not only grieving her mother, she's grieving maybe a disconnection that this will cause with her own cultural identity as well, and something that she may never be able to regain. So I think there is a lot of loss there for her.
Cultural identity. I love how you say that, because that comes up many times, not just between the parents, but with the kids as well. I want to go back to the parents
Yeah.
specifically, because it was almost like I was seeing what was going on during COVID, because
Mm,
of all the things that were being brought up. And a lot of times, and I'm going to say Caucasian people didn't get what others were
yeah.
talking about culturally. And I
Hmm.
felt like I was seeing that just
Oh,
between these two people
yeah, exactly.
who
And
are married, who are
yes.
married.
And I think that, and just to be clear too, like a lot of this is based on my own cultural history, but I will say that the family dynamic is not. My dad is very different from the father character. Um, but I do think that it is very possible that in a relationship, I mean, there's so many different ways for people to miss each other in general.
Yeah.
And if they come from different racial backgrounds too, that can also have an effect on how they see each other and how they miss each other. And that's what I wanted to look at. And I do think, yeah, like I was saying, with Judith kind of losing a part of herself with her mother's passing, I think that this really does speak very specifically to Japanese Canadian identity, where, after the incarceration of Japanese Canadians, a lot of people in my mother's generation, for example, did lose touch with that side of their culture, because there was such a large amount of pain and trauma, I think, around what happened, that it really wasn't spoken about. And so it's not like, I think that's where the added layer of this grief is, and why, yeah.
Absolutely agree with
Mhm.
that too. What was it like for you to watch this, actually seeing this physically being portrayed in something that you wrote and you also experienced? Because when I'm experiencing what I watched, I'm experiencing from what I've gone through,
Yeah.
which was why for me, it didn't matter who was from where or whatever. The story itself spoke to every type of culture out there. What was it like for you to finally see it in person?
I mean, it was, I guess, a little surreal because I spent so long with the script and then, finding these incredible actors to portray the roles and then finding the scene together. I mean, I think with every scene in the movie, it was a very surreal feeling of just like, oh wow, this is what was in my head, and now they're doing it, and yeah, it was really exciting, and yeah, just a really fulfilling feeling, I would say.
Where was it filmed? And two, um, I was trying to really focus on what time period this was. I felt
Mhm.
like you sneakily kind of made sure that there wasn't so much of a, like, saying this was the 70s or 80s or the 90s or the 2000s. It could have been any of that time.
So to answer your first question, it was shot on Gabriola Island primarily. And it was shot at an actual retreat called the Haven, where people do go and do self-development
Okay.
workshops. Although I can't say that the exercises are at all based on what they do there. I'm sure they're a lot better than what I wrote. And we also shot some of the exterior scenes in Ucluelet and Tofino.
Mhm.
And it was actually set in 1994. And the only hints that you have in the film is you see a $2 bill, which could be earlier, of course, but
Yeah.
you also see on the TV, they're talking about the Stanley Cup riots in
Yes.
1994. So that's the only little hint that you get about where it or when it is, I guess.
Fantastic. I think an amazing story. What do you hope that folks are going to get from this when they see this?
I hope that what they will get is a sense of curiosity around the story. I love it when people leave a film and they have questions. I don't like to answer everything in a film. I think that part of what's special about making a film is to write something and put the questions out there so that people question it afterwards. And I also hope that people will get a sense of connection to the story. I hope it speaks to other Japanese Canadians and other Asian Canadians and Americans, and um, also on a more universal level. I think it's looking at a lot of themes around what it means to be a woman, and I hope that people will also relate to that as well.
I think they will. I loved
Yeah,
it.
thank you.
Absolutely loved it from beginning again, from beginning to end. Meredith, thank you so much for this interview. Congratulations on having this great film at the Toronto International Film Festival. I know people are going to love this, and I cannot
Thank
wait
you.
to see what you're going to come up with next.
Thank you so much, Rudy. Thank you. Really appreciate it.